The Princess and the Physicist by Evelyn E. Smith. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Elected a god, Zen the Omnipotent longed for supernatural powers, for he was also Zen the All-Put-Upon, a galactic sucker. Zen the Terrible lay quiescent in the secret retreat which housed his corporeal being, all the aspects of his personality wallowing in the luxury of a day off. How glad he was that he had had the forethought to stipulate a weekly holiday for himself, when first this godhead had been thrust upon him hundreds of centuries before. He'd accepted the perquisites of divinity with pleasure then. It was some little time before he discovered its drawbacks, and by then it was too late. He had become the established church. All the aspects of his personality rested, save one, that is, and that one, stretching out an impalpable tendril of curiosity, brought back to his total consciousness the news that a spaceship from Earth had arrived when no ship from Earth was due. So what? The total consciousness asked lazily of itself. Probably they have a large out-of-season order for Hajench. My Hajench, going to provide salad bowls for barbarians. When, 20 years previously, the Earthmen had come back to their colony on Uxan after a lapse of thousands of years, Zen had been hopeful that they would take some of the divine work off his hands. After all, since it was they who had originally established the colony, it should be their responsibility. But it seemed that all humans, not merely the Uxanok, were irresponsible. The Earthmen were interested only in trade and tribute. They even refused to believe in the existence of Zen, an attitude which he found extremely irritating to his ego. True, Uxan prospered commercially to a mild extent after their return, for the local ceramics that had been developed in the long interval found wide acceptance throughout the galaxy, particularly the low bowls which had hitherto been used only for burning incense before Zen the Formidable. Now, every 2-bit planet offered Hajench in its gift shops. Culturally, though, Uxan had degenerated under the new Earth administration. No more criminals were thrown to the squitch. Zwoosh lost its interest when new laws prohibited the ancient custom of executing the losing side after each game. There was no tourist trade, for the planet was too far from the rest of the galaxy. The commercial spaceships came only once every 3 months and left the same day. The 2 destroyers that guarded the planet arrived at rare intervals for fueling or repairs, but the crew never had anything to do with the Uxanok. Local ordinance forbade the maidens of Uxan to speak to the Outlanders, and the Outlanders were not interested in any of the other native products. But the last commercial spaceship had departed less than 3 weeks before on its regular run, and this was not one of the guard ships. Zen reluctantly conceded to himself that he would have to investigate this situation further if he wanted to retain his reputation for omniscience. Sometimes, in an occasional moment of self-doubt, he wondered if he weren't too much of a perfectionist, but then he rejected the thought as self-sacrilege. Zen dutifully intensified the beam of awareness and returned it to the audience chamber, where the 2 strange Earthmen who had come on the ship were being ushered into the presence of the king by none other than Gush, the venerable Prime Minister himself. "Gentlemen," Gush beamed, his long white beard vibrating in an excess of hospitality, "His Gracious Majesty will be delighted to receive you at once." And crossing his wrists in the secular za, He led the way to where Uxlu XV was seated in full regalia upon his imposing, golden, gem-encrusted throne. Uxlu himself, Zen admitted grudgingly, was an imposing sight to anyone who didn't know the old Yeo. The years, for he was a scant decade younger than Guj, had merely lent dignity to his handsome features, and he was still tall and upright. "Welcome, earthlings, to Uxan," King Uxlu said in the sonorous tones of the practiced public speaker. "If there is aught we can do to advance your comfort whilst you sojourn on our little planet, you have but to speak." He did not, Zen noted with approval, rashly promise that requests would necessarily be granted, which was fine, because the god well knew who the carrier out of requests would be. Zen, the Almighty, the All-Powerful, the All-Put-Upon. "Thank you, Your Majesty," the older of the two scientists said. "We merely seek a retired spot in which to conduct our researches." "Researches, eh?" the king repeated with warm interest. "Are you, perhaps, scientists?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Every one of Zen's perceptors quivered expectantly. Earth science was banned on Uxan, with the result that its acquisition had become the golden dream of every Uxina, including, of course, their god. The older scientist gave a stiff bow. "I am an anthropologist. My name is Kendrick, Professor Alpheus Kendrick. My assistant, Dr. Peter Hammond," he indicated the tall young man with him, "is a physicist." The king and the prime minister conferred together in whispers. Zen wished he could join them, but he couldn't materialize on that plane without incense, and he preferred his subjects not to know that he could be invisibly present, especially on his day off. Of course, his immaterial omnipresence was a part of the accepted dogma, but there is a big difference between accepting a concept on the basis of faith or of proven fact. "Curious researches," the king said, emerging from the conference, "that require both physics and anthropology." "Yes," said Kendrick. "They are rather involved at that." Peter Hammond shuffled his feet. "Perhaps some of our technicians might be of assistance to you," the king suggested. "They may not have your science, but they are very adept with their hands." "Our researches are rather limited in scope," Kendrick assured him. "We can do everything needful quite adequately ourselves. All we need is a place in which to do it." "You shall have our own second-best palace," the king said graciously. "It has both hot and cold water laid on, as well as central heating." "We've brought along our own collapsible laboratory dwelling," Kendrick explained. "We just want a spot to set it up." Uxlu sighed. "The royal parks are at your disposal. You will undoubtedly require servants?" "We have a robot, thanks." "A robot is a mechanical man who does all our housework," Hammond, more courteous than his superior, explained. Zen wondered how he could ever have felt a moment's uneasiness concerning these wonderful strangers. "Zen will be interested to hear of this," the prime minister said cannily. He and the king nodded at one another. "Who, did you say?" Kendrick asked eagerly. "Zen the Terrible," the king repeated. "Zen the All-Powerful. Zen the Encyclopedic. Surely you've heard of him?" he asked in some surprise. "He's Uxan's own particular, personal, and private god, exclusive to our planet." Yes, of course I've heard about him," Kendrick said, trembling with hardly repressed excitement. What a correct attitude, Zen thought. One rarely finds such religious respect among foreigners. In fact, I've heard a great deal about him, and I should like to know even more. Kendrick spoke almost reverently. He is an extremely interesting divinity, the king replied complacently. And if your robot cannot teleport or requires a hand with the heavy work, do not hesitate to call on Zen the Accommodating. We'll detail a priest to summon. The robot manages very well all by itself. Thank you, Kendrick said quickly. In his hideaway, the material body of Zen breathed a vast, multiple sigh of relief. He was getting to like these Earthmen more and more by the minute. Might I inquire, the king asked, into the nature of your researches? An investigation of the prevalent nuclear ritual beliefs on Uxan in relation to the overall matrix of social culture, and we really must get along and see to the unloading of the ship. Goodbye, Your Majesty, Your Excellency. And Kendrick dragged his protesting aide off. If only, said the king, I were still an absolute monarch, I would teach these earthlings some manners. His face grew wistful. Well, I remember how my father would have had those who crossed him torn apart by wild squidge. If you did have the earthlings torn apart by wild squidge, sire, Gudge pointed out, then you would certainly never be able to obtain any information from them. Uxlu sighed. I would merely have them torn apart a little, just enough so that they would answer a few civil questions. He sighed again. And supposing they did happen to, pass on in the process, think of the tremendous lift to my ego. But nobody thinks of the king's ego anymore these days. No, things were not what they had been since the time the planet had been retrieved by the Earthlings. They had not communicated with Uxan for so many hundreds of years, they had explained, because, after a more than ordinarily disastrous war, they had lost the secret of space travel for centuries. Now, wanting to make amends for those long years of neglect, they immediately provided that the Earth language and the Earth income tax become mandatory upon Uxan. The language was taught by recordings. Since the Uxanok were a highly intelligent people, they had all learned it quickly and forgotten most of their native tongue except for a few untranslatable concepts. Must be a new secret atomic weapon they're working on, Uxlu decided. Why else would they come to such a remote corner of the galaxy? And you will recall that the older one, Kendrick, said something about nuclear beliefs. If only we could discover what it is, secure it for ourselves, perhaps we could defeat the Earthmen, drive them away. He sighed for the third time that morning. And rule the planet ourselves. Just then, the Crown Princess Azimi entered the throne room. Azimi really lived up to her title of most fair and exalted. For centuries of selective breeding, under which the kings of Uxan had seized the loveliest women of the planet for their wives, had resulted in an outstanding pulchritude. Her hair was as golden as the ripe fruit that bent the boughs of the Iolo tree, and her eyes were bluer than the uriz stones on the belt girdling her slender waist. Reproductions of the famous portrait of her which hung in the great hall of the palace were very popular on calendars. "My father grieves," she observed, making the secular za. "Pray tell your unworthy daughter what sorrow racks your noble bosom." "Uxan is a backwash," her father mourned. "A planet forgotten while the rest of the galaxy goes by. Our ego has reached its nadir." "Why did you let yourself be conquered?" the princess retorted scornfully. "Ah, had I been old enough to speak then, matters would be very different today." Although she seemed too beautiful to be endowed with brains, Azimi had been graduated from the Royal University with high honors. Zen the erudite was particularly fond of her, for she had been his best student in advanced theology. She was, moreover, an ardent patriot and leader of the underground Mulai Free Uxan movement, with which Zen was more or less in sympathy. since he felt oxen belonged to him and not to the earthlings. After all, he had been there first. "Let ourselves be conquered?" Her father's voice rose to a squeak. "Let ourselves? Nobody asked us. We were conquered." "True, but we could have at least essayed our strength against the conquerors, instead of capitulating like yuck. We could have fought to the last man." "A woman is always ready to fight to the last man," Gush commented. "Did you hear that, ancient and revered parent? He called me, a princess of the blood, a woman." "We are all equal before Zen," Gush said sententiously, making the high za. "Praise Zen," Uxlu and Azimi chanted perfunctorily, bowing low. Azimi, still angry, ordered Gush, who was also high priest, to start services. Kindling the incense in the hajen, he began the chant. Of course, it was his holiday, but Zen couldn't resist the appeal of the incense. Besides, he was there anyway, so it was really no trouble. No trouble, he thought, greedily sniffing the delicious aroma at all. He materialized ahead with 7 nostrils so that he was able to inhale the incense in one delectable gulp. Then, "No prayers answered on Thursday," he said, and disappeared. That would show them. Drat Zen and his days off? The princess was in a fury. "Very well, we'll manage without Zen the spiteful. Now, precisely what is troubling you, worthy and undeservedly honored parent?" "Those 2 scientists who arrived from Earth, didn't you meet them when you came in?" "No, respected father," she said, sitting on the arm of the throne. "I must have just missed them. What are they like?" He told her what they were like in terms not even a monarch should use before his daughter. "And those squatch," he concluded, "are undoubtedly working on a secret weapon. If we had it, we could free oxen." "Mulai oxen!" the princess shouted, standing up. "My friends, must we continue to submit to the yoke of the tyrant? Arise! Smite the—" "Anyone," said Gush, "can make a speech." The princess sat on the steps of the throne and pondered. "Obviously, we must introduce a spy into their household to learn their science and turn it to our advantage." "They're very careful, those earthlings," Gush informed her superciliously. "It is obvious they do not intend to let any of us come near them." The princess gave a knowing smile. "But they undoubtedly will need at least one menial to care for their dwelling. I shall be that menial. I, Azimi, will so demean myself for the sake of my planet. Mulai oxen!" "You cannot do it, Azimi," her father said, distressed. "You must not defile yourself so. I will not hear of it." "And besides," Gush interposed, "they will need no servants. All their housework is to be done by their robot, a mechanical man that performs all menial duties. And you, your royal highness, could not plausibly disguise yourself as a machine." "No, I expect not." The princess hugged the rosy knees revealed by her brief tunic and thought aloud. "But just supposing something went wrong with the robot. They do not possess another?" "They referred only to one, Highness," Gush replied reluctantly. "But they may have the parts with which to construct another." "Nonetheless, it is well worth the attempt," the princess declared. "You will cast a spell on the robot, Gush, so that it stops." He sighed. "Very well, your highness. I suppose I could manage that." Making the secular za, he left the royal pair. Outside, his voice could be heard bellowing in the anteroom. "Has any of you squats seen my pliers?" "There's no need for worry, venerated ancestor," the princess assured the monarch. "All helpful Zen will aid me with my tasks." Far away in his arcane retreat, the divinity groaned to himself. Another aspect of Zen's personality followed the two Earthmen as they left the palace to supervise the erection of their prefab by the crew of the spaceship in one of the royal parks. A vast crowd of Uxanok gathered to watch the novelty, and among them there presently appeared a sinister-looking old man with a red beard, who Zen the Pansophic had no difficulty in recognizing as the Prime Minister, heavily disguised. Of course, it would have been no trouble for Zen to carry out Gudge's mission for him, but he believed in self-help, especially on Thursdays. "You certainly fixed us up fine," Hammond muttered disrespectfully to the professor. "You should have told the king we were inventing a vacuum cleaner or something. Now they'll just be more curious than ever. And I still don't see why you refused the priest. Seems to me he'd be just what you needed." "Yes, and the first to catch on to why we're here. We mustn't antagonize the natives. These closed groups are so apt to resent any investigation into their mythos." "If it's all so mythical, why do you need a scientist then?" "A physical scientist, you mean," Kendrick said austerely. "For anthropology is a science too, you know." Peter snorted. "Some Earthmen claim actually to have seen these alleged manifestations," Kendrick went on to explain, "in which case there must be some kind of mechanical trickery involved, which is where you come in. Of course, I would have preferred an engineer to help me, but you were all I could get from the government. And you wouldn't have gotten me either if the Minister of Science didn't have it in for me," Peter said irately. "I'm far too good for this piddling little job, and you know it. If it weren't for envy in high places—" "Better watch out," the professor warned, "or the minister might decide you're too good for science altogether, and you'll be switched to a position more in keeping with your talents, say, as a refuse removal agent." "And what is wrong with the honored art of refuse removal?" Zen wondered. There were a lot of mystifying things about these Earthmen. The scientist's quaint little edifice was finally set up, and the spaceship took its departure. It was only then that the Earthmen discovered that something they called cigarettes couldn't be found in the welter of packages, and that the robot wouldn't cook dinner or, in fact, do anything. "Good old Gudge," Zen thought. "I can't figure out what's gone wrong," Peter complained as he finished putting the mechanical man together again. "Everything seems to be all right, yet the damn thing won't function. Looks as if we'll have to do the housework ourselves, confound it." Peter said. "You can, but not me. The Earth government put me under your orders so far as this project is concerned, sir, but I'm not supposed to do anything degrading, sir, and menial work is classified as just that, sir, so—" All right, Kendrick said. "Though it seems to me if I'm willing to do it, you should have no objection." "It's your project, sir. I gathered from the king, though," Peter added more helpfully, "that some of the natives still do menial labor themselves." "How disgusting that there should still be a planet so backward that human beings should be forced to do humiliating tasks," Kendrick said. "You don't know the half of it either," Zen thought, shocked all the way back to his physical being. It had never occurred to him that the function of gods on other planets might be different than on Uxan, unless the Earthlings failed to pay reverence to their own gods, which seemed unlikely in view of the respectful way with which Professor Kendrick had greeted the mention of Zen's awe-inspiring name. Then refuse removal was not necessarily a divine prerogative. Those first colonists were very clever, Zen thought bitterly, sweet-talking me into becoming a god and doing all their dirty work. I was happy here as the only inhabitant. Why did I ever let those interlopers involve me in theolatry? But I can't quit now. The Uxanok need me, and I need incense. I'm fettered by my own weakness. Still, I have the glimmerings of an idea. Oh, how much could a half-witted menial find out? Peter demanded. Remember, it's either a native servant, sir, or you do the housework yourself. All right, Kendrick agreed gloomily. We'll try one of the natives. So the next day, still attended by the unseen presence of Zen, they sought audience with the Prime Minister. Welcome, Earthmen, to the humble apartments of His Majesty's most unimportant subject. Gudge greeted them, making a very small za as he led them into the largest reception room. Kendrick absently ran his finger over the undercarving of a small gold table. Look, no dust, he whispered. Must have excellent help here. Zen couldn't help preening just a bit. At least he did his work well. No one could gainsay that. Your desire, Gudge went on, apparently anxious to get to the point, is my command. Would you like a roche of dancing girls to perform before you, or... The king said something yesterday about servants being available, Kendrick interrupted. And our robot seems to have broken down. Could you tell us where we could get someone to do our housework? An expression of vivid pleasure illuminated the Prime Minister's venerable countenance. By fortunate chance, gentlemen, a small lot of maids is to be auctioned off at a village very near the imperial city tomorrow. I should be delighted to escort you there personally. Auctioned? Kendrick repeated. You mean they sell servants here? Gudge raised his snowy eyebrows. Sold? Certainly not. They're leased for 2 years apiece. After all, if you have no lease, what guarantee do you have that your servants will stay after you have trained them? None whatsoever. When the two scientists had gone, Azimi emerged from behind a bright-colored tapestry depicting Zen in 753 of his attributes. The younger one is not at all bad-looking, she commented, patting her hair into place. I do like big blonde men. Perhaps my task will not be as unpleasant as I fancied. Gudge stroked his beard. How do you know the Earthlings will select you, Your Highness? Many other maids will be auctioned off at the same time. The princess stiffened angrily. They'll pick me, or they'll never leave Uxan alive, and you, Your Excellency, would not outlive them. Although it meant he had to overwork the other aspects of his multiple personality, Zen kept one free so that the next day he could join the Earthmen, in spirit that was, on their excursion in search of a menial. If, as an anthropologist, you are interested in local folkways, Professor, Gudge remarked graciously as he and the scientist piled into a scarlet boat-shaped vehicle, you will find much to attract your attention in this quaint little planet of ours. Are the eyes painted in front of the car to ward off demons? Kendrick asked. Car? Oh, you mean the Yeo. Gudge patted the forepart of the vehicle. It purred and fluttered long eyelashes. We breed an especially bouncy strain with seats. They're so much more comfortable, you know. You mean this is a live animal? Gudge nodded apologetically. Of course it doesn't go very fast. Now, if we had the atomic power drive, such as your spaceships have... You'd shoot right off into space, Hammond assured him. Speed, said Kendrick, is the curse of modern civilization. Be glad you still retain some of the old-fashioned graces here in Uxan. You see, he whispered to his assistant, a clear case of magical religious culture freezing, resulting in a static society unable to advance itself, comes of its implicit reliance upon the powers of an omnipotent deity. Zen took some time to figure this out. But that's right, he concluded in surprise. I thought your god teleported things, Peter asked Gudge. How come he doesn't teleport you around if you're in such a hurry to go places? Hendrik glared at him. Please remember that I'm the anthropologist, he hissed. You have got to know how to describe the transcendental personality with the proper respect. We don't have Zen teleport animate objects. the Prime Minister explained affably, or even inanimate ones if they are fragile. For he tends to lose his temper sometimes when he feels that he is overworked. Feels, indeed, Zen said to himself, and throws things about. We cannot reprove him for his misbehavior. After all, a god is a god. The apparent irreverence, Kendrick explained in an undertone, undoubtedly signifies that he is dealing with ancillary or perhaps peripheral religious beliefs. I must make a note of them. He did so. By the time the royal Yeo had arrived at the village where the planetary auctions for domestics were held, the maids were already arranged in a row on the platform. Most were depressingly plain creatures and dressed in thick, sack-like tunics. Among them, the graceful form of Azimi was conspicuous, clad in a garment similar in cut but fashioned of translucent gauze, almost as blue as her eyes. Peter straightened his tie and assumed a much more cheerful expression. "Let's rent that one," he exclaimed, pointing to the princess. "Nonsense," Kendrick told him. "In the first place, she's obviously the most expensive model. Secondly, she would be too distracting for you. And finally, a pretty girl is never as good a worker as a plain... We'll take that one." The professor pointed to the dumpiest and oldest of the women. "How much did I offer to start, Your Excellency? No sense beginning the bidding too high. We Earthmen aren't made of money, in spite of what the rest of the galaxy seems to think." 100 credits is standard," Gush murmured. "However, sir, there is one problem. Have you considered how you are going to communicate with your maid?" "Communicate? Are they mutes?" "No, but very few of these women speak Earth." A look of surprise flitted over the faces of the servants, vanishing as Her Royal Highness glared at them. Kendrick pursed thin lips. "I was under the impression that the Earth language was mandatory on Uxan." "Oh, it is. It is indeed," Gush said hastily. "However, it is so hard to teach these backward peasants new ways." One of the backward peasants gave a loud sniff, which changed to a squeal as she was honored with a pinch from the hand of royalty. "But you will not betray us. We are making rapid advances, and before long, we hope to make Earth universal." "Of course we won't," Peter put in before Kendrick had a chance to reply. "What's more, I don't see why the Uxnians shouldn't be allowed to speak their own language." The princess gave him a dazzling smile. "Mulai Uxan! We must not allow the beautiful Uxalk tongue to fall into desuetude. Bring back our lovely language." Gush gestured desperately. She tossed her head, but stopped. "Please, Kendrick," Peter begged. "We've got to buy that one." "Certainly not. You can see she's a troublemaker." "Do you speak Earth?" the professor demanded of the maid he had chosen. "No speak," she replied. Peter tugged at his superior's sleeve. "That one speaks Earth." Kendrick shook him off. "Do you speak Earth?" he demanded of the second oldest and ugliest. She shook her head. The others went through the same procedure. "It looks," Peter said, grinning, "as if we'll have to take mine." "I suppose so," Kendrick agreed gloomily. "But somehow I feel no good will come of this." Zen wondered whether Earthmen had powers of precognition. No one bid against them, so they took a 2-year lease on the Crown Princess for the very reasonable price of 100 credits and drove her home with them. Azimi gazed at the little prefab with disfavor. "But why are we halting outside this glue hutch, masters?" Gush cleared his throat. "Sirs, I wish you joy." He made the secular za. "Should you ever be in need again, do not hesitate to get in touch with me at the palace." And, climbing into the Yeo, he was off. The others entered the small dwelling. "That little trip certainly gave me an appetite," Kendrick said, rubbing his hands together. Azimi, you had better start lunch right away. This is the kitchen. Azimi gazed around the cubicle with disfavor. Truly, it is not much, she observed. However, masters, if you will leave me, I will endeavor to do my poor best. Let me show you, Peter began, but Kendrick interrupted. Leave the girl alone, Hammond. She must be able to cook if she's a professional servant. We've wasted the whole morning as it is. Perhaps we can get something done before lunch. Azimi closed the door, got out her portable altar. All members of the royal family were qualified members of the priesthood, though they seldom practiced, and in a low voice, for the door and walls were thin, summoned Zen the All-Capable. The god sighed as he materialized his head. I might have known you would require me. What is your will, O most fair? I have been ordered to prepare the stranger's midday repast, O puissant one, and I know not what to do with all this which they assure me is their food. And she pointed scornfully to the cans and jars and packages. How should I know, then? Zen asked unguardedly. The princess looked at him. Surely Zen the all-knowing jests. Yes, merely having my bit of fun, you know. He hastily inspected the exterior of the alleged foods. There appear to be legends inscribed upon the containers. Perchance, were we to read them, they might give a clue as to their contents. Oh, omniscient one, the princess exclaimed. Truly you are wise and sapient indeed, and it is I who was the fool to have doubted for so much as an instant. Oh, you doubted, did you? Terrible Zen frowned terribly. Well, see that it doesn't happen again. He had no intention of losing his divine authority at this stage of the game. Your will is mine, all-wise one, and I think you had best materialize a few pair of arms as well as your august and awe-inspiring countenance, for there is much work to be done. Since the partitions were thin, Zen and the princess could hear most of the conversation in the main room. First thing to do, Kendrick's voice remarked, is to find out whether we're permitted to attend one of their religious ceremonies, where Zen is said to manifest himself actually, and not, it is contended, just symbolically. The stove is right here, Almighty, the princess suggested. Not against the door where you are pressing your divine ear. Shh! What I hear is fraught with import for the future of the planet. Mulayaksun! Mulayaksun! The princess replied automatically. I wonder how hard it'll be to crash the services, Kendrick went on. Most primitives don't like outsiders present at their ritual activities, especially if there are actual manifestations of their god, Hammond contributed. That would mean the priests are up to some sort of trickery, and they wouldn't care to run the risk of having us see through. He was interrupted by a loud crash from the kitchen. Are you all right, Azimi? He yelled. Need any help? All is well, she called back. But I pray you do not enter, masters. The reverberation was part of a rite designed to deflect evil spirits from the food. Were a heretic to be present or interrupt the ceremonies, the spell would be voided and the food contaminated. Okay, Peter returned, and in a lower tone which he probably thought she could not overhear, seems you were right. Naturally. There was complacency in the professor's voice. And now let us consider the validating features of the social structure as related to the mythos, and, of course, the ethos, where the two are not coincident, of the Uxnians. Imagine, Zen complained in the kitchen, accusing me of being a mere trick of the priesthood? Supreme me? Supreme Butterfingers? The princess snapped, irritation driving her to the point of sacrilege. You spilled that red stuff, She bent over to read the legend on the container. The ketchup, all over the floor. The floor is relatively clean, Zen murmured abstractedly. We can scoop up the substance and incorporate it in whatever dainty dish we prepare for the earthlings' repast. Now they'll think that I, Zen the Accessible, am difficult to have audience with. He mourned, whereas I was particularly anxious to hold converse with them and discover what quest brings them to Uxan. That is," he added hastily, remembering he was omniscient, "just how they would justify its rationale. Shall we get on with our culinary activities, almighty one?" Azimi asked coldly. If the most fair and exalted had a flaw, Zen thought, it was a one-track mind. "What in hell did you put in this, Azimi?" Kendrick demanded after one taste of the steaming casserole of food which she had set proudly before the two Earthmen. "Ketchup, that's for sure," Peter murmured, rolling a mouthful around his tongue as he sought to separate its component flavors. "And rhubarb, I should say. Dried fish and garlic," Kendrick made further identifications. "And a comestible called marshmallow," Azimi beamed. "You like it? I am so glad." "I do not," Kendrick began, but Peter intervened. "It's very nice, Azimi," he said tactfully, "but I guess we're just used to old run-of-the-mill Earth cooking. It's all our fault. We should have given you a recipe." "I had a recipe," Azimi returned. "It came to me by divine inspiration." Kendrick compressed his lips. "Useful sort of divinity they have around here," Peter said. "Everything that goes wrong seems to take place in the name of religion. Are you sure you didn't happen to overhear us talking before, Azimi?" "Don't be silly, Hammond," Kendrick snapped. "These simple primitives do not have the sophistication to use their religious beliefs consciously as rationalization for their incompetence." "Even had I wished to eavesdrop," Azimi said haughtily, "I would hardly have had the opportunity. I was too busy trying to prepare a palatable repast for you, and—" Her voice broke. "You didn't like it." "Oh, I did like it, Azimi," Peter protested. "It's just that I'm allergic to rhubarb." "Wait," she exclaimed, smiling again. "For dessert, I have an especial surprise for you." She brought in a dish triumphantly. "Is this not just how you have it on Earth?" "Stewed cigarettes with whipped cream," Kendrick muttered. "Stewed cigarettes. Where on Earth, on Uxan, did you find them?" "In a large box with the other puddings," she beamed. "Is it not highly succulent and flavorful?" The two scientists sprang from their chairs and dashed into the kitchen. Azimi stared after them. When they returned, they looked much more cheerful. They seated themselves, and soon fragrant clouds of smoke began to curl toward the ceiling. "They are calling me at last," Zen thought happily. "And with such delightful incense. Who wants chance anyway?" "But what are you doing?" the princess shrieked. Zen hastened to manifest himself, complete with 14 nostrils, before she could spoil everything. "The procedure is most unorthodox," he murmured aloud. "But truly this new incense has a most delicious aroma, extremely pleasing to my ego. What is your will, O strangers?" "All merciful Zen," the princess pleaded, "forgive them, for they knew not what they did. They did not mean to summon you." "Then who," asked Zen in a terrible voice, "is this wonderful smoke for? Some foreign god who they worship on my territory?" And he wouldn't put it past them either. Peter looked at the anthropologist, but Kendrick was obviously too paralyzed with fright to speak. "As a matter of fact, your omnipotence," the physicist said haltingly, "this is not part of our religious ritual. We burn this particular kind of incense, which we call tobacco, for our own pleasure." "In other words," Zen said coldly, "you worship yourselves. I work and slave my godhood to the bone, only to have egotists running all over my planet." "No, it's nothing like that at all," Kendrick quavered. "We smoke the tobacco to, well, gratify our appetites, like eating, you know." Well, you'll have to forego that pleasure, Zen said, frowning terribly. Even the tall one cowered, he noted with appreciation. It had been a long time since people had really cringed before his frown. The Uxanok had come to take him too much for granted. They would learn their mistake. From now on, he said portentously, the tobacco must be reserved for my use alone. Smoke it only for purposes of worship. Once a day will be sufficient, he added graciously, and perhaps twice on holy days. But we do not worship alien gods, Kendrick persisted in a shaky voice. Even if you were a god. Zen frowned. Would you care to step outside and test my divinity? Well, no, but... Then as far as you're concerned, I am divine, and let's have no more quibbling. Don't forget the tobacco once a day. About time I had a change from that low-grade incense. He vanished. Too late he remembered that he had planned to ask the Earthlings why they had come to Uxan, and to discuss a little business proposition with them. Oh well, time for that at his next materialization for them. And, now that he had considered the matter, the direct approach might very well be a mistake. He hoped Azimi would make sure they burned him tobacco regularly. Really good stuff, almost made godhood worthwhile. But then he felt that way about incense at first. No, he had other ideas for making divinity worthwhile, and Azimi was going to help him, even if she didn't know it. People had used him long enough. It was his turn to use them. In the kitchen, Azimi recalled Zen, and together they washed the dishes and listened to the scientists quarreling in the next room. You will note the use of incense as standard socio-religious parallelism, Hammond. Men have appetites and must be gratified, and so they feel their supreme being must also eat. Only, being a deity, he consumes aromas. Yes, Peter said. You explained all that to him much more succinctly, though. Ha! Well, have you any idea yet as to how the trick was worked? Worked? What do you mean? How they made that talking image appear. Clever device, I must say. Although the scumps of Aldebaran 3 didn't look like a trick to me. That's a fine young man, Zen said approvingly to Azimi. I like him. You really do, Most High? I am so glad. You don't mean you really believe the Zen is an actual living god? Kendrick spluttered. There was a silence. No, not a god, Peter said finally, but not a human either. Perhaps another life form with attributes different from ours. After all, do we know who or what was on Uxan before it was colonized by Earth? T'cha, Kendrick said. Azimi looked at Zen. Zen looked at Azimi. The concept of godhood varies from society to society, the divinity told the princess. Peter is not being sacrilegious, just manifesting a healthy skepticism. You're a credulous fool, Kendrick said hotly to his assistant. I don't blame the secretary for demoting you. When we return to Earth, I shall recommend your transfer to refuse removal. You have no business at all in science. There was a sound of footsteps. Leaving my noxious company? Peter's voice asked tightly. I'm going out to the nearest temple to have a chat with one of the priests. I can expect much more sensible answers from him than from you. The outside door slammed. Speaking of refuse removal, Almighty, Azimi said to Zen, would you teleport the remains of this miserable repast to the sacred garbage dump? And you need not return. I'll be able to handle the rest myself. Mulai Uxan, Zen reminded her, and vanished with the garbage. But although the refuse was duly teleported, the unseen, impalpable presence of the god remained. The door to the kitchen opened, and Hammond walked in, his face grim. Need any help, Azimi? He asked. Not very graciously. Or should I say, Your Royal Highness? Azimi dropped a plate, which, fortunately, was plastic. "How did you know who I was?" He sat down on a stool. "Didn't you remember that your portrait hung in the great hall of the palace?" "Of course," she said, chagrined. "A portrait of a servant would hardly be hung there." "Not only that, but I asked whom it depicted. Do you think I wouldn't notice the picture of such a beautiful girl?" "But if you knew, then why did you?" He grinned. "I realized you were up to no good, and I have no especial interest in the success of Kendrick's project." Azimi carefully dried a dish. "And what is his project?" "To investigate the mythos of the allegedly corporeal divinity in static primitive societies, with a special reference to the god concept of Zen on Uxin." "Is that all?" "All?" Zen thought. "Sounds like an excellent subject for research to me. Unfortunate that I cannot possibly let the study be completed, as I am going to invalidate the available data very shortly." "That's all, Azimi." "And how is it Professor Kendrick did not recognize me from the picture?" "Oh, he never notices girls' pictures. He's a complete idiot. You overheard us just now. When we get back to Earth, I'm going to be a garbage collector. Here on Uxin, refuse removal is a divine prerogative," Azimi remarked. "Or Zen, whatever he is," Peter said to himself. "But a god, being a god," he went on in a louder voice, "can raise himself above the more sordid aspects of the job. As a mere human, I cannot. Azimi, I wonder if—" He looked nervously at his watch. "I hope Kendrick takes his time." "He will not return soon," Azimi told him, putting away the dish towel. "Not if he is determined to find a temple, because there are no temples. Zen is a god of the hearth and home." "Azimi," Peter said, getting up and coming closer to her, "isn't there some way I can stay here on Uxin? Some job I can fill? You're the crown princess. You must have a drag with the civil service." He looked at her longingly. "Oh, if only you weren't so far above me in rank." "Listen, Peter." She caught his hands. "If you were the royal physicist, our ranks would not be so far disparate. My distinguished father would make you a duke, and princesses have often—" She blushed. "That is to say, dukes are considered quite eligible. Do you think I have a chance of becoming royal physicist?" "I am certain of it." She came very close to him. "You could give us the atomic drive, design spaceships, weapons, for us. Couldn't you, darling?" "I could." He looked troubled. "But it's one thing to become an extraterrestrial, another to betray my own world." Azimi put her arms around him. "But Uxin will be your world, Peter. As Prince Consort, you would no longer be concerned with the welfare of the Earthlings." "Yes, but—" "And where's their betrayal? We do not seek to conquer Earth or its colonies. All we want is to regain our own freedom. We are entitled to freedom, aren't we, Peter?" He nodded slowly. "I suppose so." "Mulai Uxin!" She thrust a package of cigarettes into his hand. "Let us summon the Almighty One to bless our betrothal." Peter obediently lit 2 cigarettes and gave one to her. Zen materialized his head. "Blessings on you, my children," he said, sniffing ecstatically. "And welcome, holy chief physicist, to my service." "Royal chief physicist," Azimi corrected. "No, that is insufficient for his merits. Holy and sacrosanct chief physicist is what he will be, with the rank of prince. You will have the honor of serving terrible Zen myself, Peter Hammond." "Delighted," said the young man, dubiously. "You will construct robots that do housework, vehicles that carry refuse to the sacred garbage dump, vans that transport household goods, machines that lave dishes." "Will do," Peter said with obvious relief. And may I say your benignness, that it will be a pleasure to serve you. But the atomic drive, freedom, Azimi stammered. These will point the shorter way to the true freedom. My omni-dynamism has stood in the way of your cultural advancement, as Professor Kendrick will undoubtedly be delighted to explain to you. But your omnipotence? Let us have no more discussion. I am your God, and I know best. Yes, Supreme One, Azimi said sullenly. You, Uxanak, have kept me so busy for thousands of years, I've had no time for my divine meditations. I shall now withdraw myself from mundane affairs. The princess forgot disappointment in anxiety. You will not leave us, then? No, my child. I shall always be present, watching over my people, guiding them, ready to help them in case of emergency. But make sure I am not summoned, save in case of dire need. No more babysitting, mind you. Yes, Almighty One. The incense will continue to be offered to me daily by everyone who seeks my sacred ear, and make sure to import a large quantity of this tobacco from earth for holy days and other occasions, he added casually, when you wish to be especially sure of incurring my divine favor. And I wish to be worshipped in temples like other gods, less chance of my being stuck with some unexpected household task. I shall manifest myself on Thursdays only, he concluded gleefully, struck by the consummate idea. Thursday will be my day to work and your holy day. All other days you will work, and I will indulge in divine meditation. I have spoken. And he withdrew all aspects of his personality to his retreat to wallow in the luxury of 6 days off per week. Naturally, to make sure the Uxanak kept the incense up to scratch, he would perform a small miracle now and then to show he was still omnipresent. Being a god, he thought as he made himself more comfortable, was not a bad thing at all. One merely needed to learn how to go about it in the right way. End of Princess and the Physicist by Evelyn E. Smith. Read by Paul Hampton.
In the Jag-Whiffing Service by David R. Bunch. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Christine Rottger. In the Jag-Whiffing Service by David R. Bunch. I had always said there was an easier way, and I think when we invade, I'll be proved right. But you know how things get started, and how powerful tradition can be, and how old line thinking can keep people, even a whole planet, in a rut. The big cargo saucers were getting bigger and bigger each year, what with the growing popularity of the Jag-Whiff places. And the Jag-Whiff places themselves were growing in number with more and more people going on the Jag. Because, well, partly because of troubles in the sky, like strange balls whirling around and unexplainable objects going beep and woof and woof woof. We of the saucers had slipped past these first baby objects okay, and knew they were just little old harmless ping-pongs that chattered a little now and then like a greeting going past. But tell the people that. They'd throw a big glass on one of the whirlers and see spikes sticking out, and maybe a big pair of eyes inside, and a nose, and a long red tongue hanging down. "The Earth Dits!" They'd scream like they'd just fallen into one of the hot canals, and they'd race off to a Jag-Whiff Jag like Judgment Day of Sins itself was after them. And the funny part of it is, I guess the people were right being scared like that, the way things turned out. But is it any wonder we were having to increase the size of the saucers to space haul all that Jag-Whiff up through the rattleballs? And a big reason makes me think it could have been done more efficiently. We were having to take so much junk stuff, extra accessories I guess you'd call it, to get the Jag-Whiff. Our Earthit contacts were always giving us the old breeze about cost of labor, cost of materials, improvement in design, and next year's inventories. Apparently the dealers didn't understand at all what the play was with us, because they'd give us so much blab that didn't apply, all about futuristic design and about how one Jag-Whiffer machine had it all over another Jag-Whiffer machine, which to us didn't mean a thing. And we didn't talk because we'd heard already how some Earthits feared the saucers, and how some Earthits said they didn't exist at all, and how some other Earthits were on the fence, saying maybe they did and maybe they didn't, so what? And how there was a wide fear and great unrest among the Earthits in general. And when it's like that, and you're a possible source for the wide fear and unrest, the whole planet full of people can easily decide they don't want any part of contributing to your pleasure. And that's what the Jag-Whiff was to us actually, pleasure. Back home when our troubles had us down, or maybe we just felt like raising a little dust, we'd go to a Jag-Whiff place, we'd plunk down our pay pictures, and the whiff tender would wheel out one of those black rings, which they have to keep under special pressures in our climate. Then he'd screw on the tube with the face piece, and we'd take our whiff, and something out of the black ring, just seemed like real thick chest filler to me, would spread all through the farthest reaches of our breath bags and go into our blood, and suddenly all 5 of our eye sticks would start whirling and focusing and zeroing in for dames, and our arms and legs would start a kick and a slap dance, enough to shake the planet down. And when our face spines and head tubes would go into that special sharp buzz of contentment, we'd know we were on our Jag, full and warm and happy, with as much pleasure as any Martian is ever supposed to know. But we never revealed the play to our Earthit contacts. We just slipped in at night in our noiseless saucers, with all lights dimmed, cleared our cargo tubes of the tons of pay picture we brought, green copy of the Earthit's currency, and took on as many of the gleaming Jag-Whiffer machines as our cargo tubes would hold. But it is 10 years now since a Jag-Whiffer captain has steered his saucer through the whirling balls. It got so the satellites would drum on the saucer from a long way out, deafening, dreadful. We saw what was coming, and we tried to beat it. We saucered around the clock for a while, trying to stockpile enough Jag-Whiff to last us. But of course we couldn't. We are about out of it now, and our land is strewn with the glittery shells that were once attached to the black tubes of the Jag-Whiff. And it could all have been done so different. I'm sure it could. That stuff wasn't just in the tubes of the Jag-Whiffer machines down there. I'm convinced of that. That stuff may have been all around us down there. I believe it was. But our government would insist we get into these suits, about so far out, you see, about the time we'd start contacting the rattleballs. And they threatened us with removal of the contacts if we broke the rules about the suits. In addition to that, they said we'd die anyway. So you see how life can be, grim and fuzzy and unsafe most of the time, and to make things even more uncertain, just because they couldn't duplicate the product we were hauling, our scientists got uppity and ignored the whole problem, except to run off to the Jag-Whiff places, of course, to ease their frustrations, which they did plenty often when they thought they wouldn't be seen. But when we invade down through there, which we plan to do soon now with our special equipment to catch and explode the whirly balls, I think we're going to find out plenty. Among other things, I think we're going to find out that the stuff we cargoed up here at such great cost that was so inefficiently packaged is all around us down there. I think when we take over down there with the right filtering equipment, jag-whiffing may become as common and economical as breathing. And another thing, I think we're going to find out we were taken for quite a ride by the Earthits with their silly way of packaging jag-whiff. Imagine having to buy all that chrome and steel, guaranteed to go over 100 miles per hour, just to get 4 little black rings of whiff. And for all the Earthits talked about it, the rings with the white sidewalls didn't whiff one bit better than the others. End of. In the Jag-Whiffing Service by David R. Bunch.
The band played on by C. Shook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matt First. The band played on by C. Shook. I'm playing trombone in a little 5-piece combo at Benny's Bar and Grill when it happens. At the time, we're slightly enlarged by the presence of 4 of Bill Gundry's boys who are working out of the park and have dropped by to sit in after they've finished. We also have present Eddie Smith and Marc R, who are clarinet and trumpet from the Pines. Benny's is the local hangout for all musicians in town, which is the main reason I'm playing there. One night, Whiteman himself shows when his band's working a theater job at the Palace. During the early part of the night, we play our own arrangements off the paper, but after about 1 o'clock, we're liable to be jamming with any of the boys who can find seats, like this night I'm telling you about. When I first noticed it, we're giving out on the Jazz Me Blues, which is a fine ensemble number. And we're hitting it in a fast Dixieland. I'm ragging the beat. I can feel the old slush pump tremble, but I figure it's because I'm really solid at the moment, and I keep on sending. Well, we clean up the jazz me's, and I'm still hot, so I hit right on the B natural for Stardust, with the boys jumping in, and we take it slow and mellow through one chorus together. Then I stand up for a solo on the second, and that's when it happens. I don't know exactly what takes place, but I'm riding as I reach out for a high one that's really out of the world. I feel the pump tremble again. Then what happens is that I am really out of the world. I mean, I'm actually out of the world. The vibrations from the trombone shoot right up my arms, and my whole body is shaking. I can't stop it. The lights fade away, and I'm trembling, so I can't even hear the music. Then I'm not shaking anymore. But Benny's is not there, and I'm not there. And it's daylight, which is really crazy because it's only 2 a.m. I'm still kind of weak as I look around, and then I'm weaker still. The least thing, I figured, was that I had a spasm or something and was in a hospital, and it was the next day. But when I look around again, I know this is no hospital. I'm lying on a big flat rock, and I'm dressed just as I was at Benny's. I even have my slip horn beside me. But the thing that gives me the jumps is the grass. It's all purple. And the trees and everything around have purple leaves when they should be green. I look at my coat. It's a light blue. My pants are black. My skin is white. Then I look at the grass beside me and I reach out and pick a handful. It's plenty purple, all right. And I'm thinking as I look at it there in my hand, there is no place in the world where the trees and plants are purple. No place in the world. I know I'm not asleep, but tell myself, whenever you read about anything like this happening, the hero always thinks he's asleep at first, then pinches himself to find out whether he is or not. So I reach over for my slush pump and give it a good blast. I hear it all right. Just to make sure, I do pinch myself slightly. But it's no soap. I am here, and the grass is still purple. I get up off the rock and walk about. When I stand up, I find that I'm in a large meadow with nothing more in sight than the rocks, here and there, a few trees. The purple grass is nearly knee-high. There's no sense in staying where I am, so I pick up my trombone and begin hiking. After I've walked a couple of miles, maybe, I come to a river. I'm not surprised to find that the water is a deep yellow. Nothing will surprise me now. There must be some settlement along this river, if there's anyone living around here, I figure, so I follow along the way the water is flowing. 3 or 4 hours I tramp, and this is something I am not used to. My feet are getting plenty beat, and I take up the old bleeder and try the Stars and Stripes Forever, the only march I can think of. This helps me stumble along at a 2/4 time for a while, but it uses up what wind I have left. Pretty soon, I'm forced to sit down and rest. Well, I guess I doze off while I'm resting. But when I come out of it, I find myself tied up, tighter than a drum, and there in front of me are 4 men, or animals, or something, examining my trombone. "Hey," I say. At that, they turn around and stare at me, and I stare even harder at them. Then I burst out laughing, for they look like 4 grown-up Donald Ducks. They have duck bills for mouths, and their feet are webbed, but they have arms instead of wings. Their bodies are covered with feathers, except for their heads, which have a greenish skin, and would be almost human if it weren't for those bills and the green color. They begin to gab among themselves, and I'm surprised because I'm expecting to hear them quack like ducks. Their voices are low-pitched, and they talk way down in their throats, something like German. Although I don't understand it, I know it isn't. They're talking about me, I can tell. And finally, one of them comes over and unties my feet and legs, but he leaves my arms fastened. He motions for me to get up. I do, and we start down the river, with one of them carrying my slip horn and walking beside me, the others floating on the water, like their barnyard relatives. This is the way we come to their town. It's only a short distance before the river widens considerably, and I can see that it's dotted with little islands. The 3 men who are swimming come closer to shore, and they walk with the one guarding me, pointing out at one of the islands as they speak. I gather that they don't know how to take me out there. One of them gestures at the water and then at me, but I shake my head no. They gab some more. Finally, one of them hops into the water and swims to the nearest island. He's back in a flash with about 10 other duck men, who immediately begin gabbing excitedly as soon as they see me. The one holding my trombone says something to them, and they shut up and get back into the water. They push me to the edge of the bank, then one of them takes hold of my legs and pulls me into the river on his back. He almost sinks before the others can grab me too and help him out, and even at that they're as far down as low E on the doghouse when they start out for the large island almost in the center of the river. This must be their main village, I figure, and it turns out that I'm right. Once we get to the village, they untie my arms and hand me my horn. I guess they figure I can't get off the island now. Well, I don't know what I'm in for, but whatever it is, it's postponed for a while because they take me to a small hut and leave me. There's nothing in the hut except a pile of pale purple straw in one of the corners. But I don't need anything else. I'm plenty weary, and I flop on the straw, and I'm asleep in a minute. When I wake up again, it's morning. I get up and walk to the door, and there are 4 or 5 of the duck men standing nearby. They see me come out, and they smile. But when I start to move about, they point back into the hut, and so I go back in and sit down. I'm still sitting there when some others come in with some trays of food. These are a lot lighter green in the faces, and I guess they must be the women of the race. They have a lot of stuff that looks like purple lettuce and different vegetable-looking things on the trays, and they act as if I'm to eat them. After I taste them, they're not so bad. I even drink a cup of the yellow water. It's not so bad either, only sweeter than I would want ordinarily. Once I've finished, I go back outside. Right in front of the door is the duck man which carried my slush pump on the walk yesterday, and when he sees me, he smiles. He comes over and hits me on the back with his hand. I do the same to him, and he smiles wider. This means we're friends, I figure, like shaking hands, so I smile too. He motions for me to come with him. Some of the others come with us, and we walk all around the village, which is not so large. My friend seems to be the head man. He walks with me, and the rest stay a little behind. I'm being treated like I have the keys to the city. All around are the small huts like the one I slept in. There isn't much else to the town except for a couple of larger buildings which are made of the same purple wood the huts are made of. I figure that if 3 people occupy each hut, there are maybe 600 altogether in the town. There's some other villages on the islands I can see, but they're not so large. After we've toured for an hour or two, the chief takes me to one of the large buildings. We go inside. City Hall, I think. And sure enough, we go right to the mayor's office, which is a little room partitioned off from the rest. There are a couple of stools or something there, and the mayor hops up on one with his thin legs underneath him. I sit on the other. He smiles, and I smile. And I think this is getting pretty dull, and maybe it would be better if they weren't so friendly, because anyway I would have some action. I think I'll get away and go over and try a few numbers on the horn. Finally, after we sit there smiling for some time, he points to himself. Ogru, he says, his name. So I hit myself on the chest and I tell him my name. Then he walks around the room and points to the stools and the table and the walls. He says words at each one. He's trying to teach me their language, so I repeat each one after him. We play this little game for a while, then we have food brought in. While we're eating, Ogru is telling me the name of what I'm chewing, and it doesn't taste nearly as good as it did when I knew it was plain food only. When we finish eating, Ogru gets up and takes me back to our hut. I'm supposed to stay there, I see. Anyway, I think I will get out a few riffs just to keep in practice, so I go inside for my slush pump. It isn't there. This is why the so-and-so was keeping me away all the time he did, I say to myself. I'm plenty burned up, but there's nothing I can do. When Ogru shows up the next morning, I try to tell him about it, but he pretends not to understand. Instead, we go through the same routine as the day before, only we eat in another room, and he shows me some new words. Well, the horn doesn't show up, and I can tell my lip is slipping out of shape. It's now 3 weeks since I got into this place, and I have nothing different. I'm able to talk to the duckmen, though, and I will say for Ogru that he's a good teacher, since I am never more than a poor C in languages when I'm in school. Then one day Ogru says to me, Mac, I'm happy to tell you we have located the object which you call a trombone. One of the men took it and has had it hidden. He feared it was a thing of evil power. I assured him it was not, though I was not sure myself. I hope I was correct. Ogru, old boy, I tell him, the trombone is simply a thing of good power, as I will show you if you'll produce it. It's a thing of music. Why, Mac, says Ogru, why did you not say this before? We have music, too. It's our great pride. Now, during the time the mayor's been educating me, there's one of the large buildings which I've never been in. I've asked Ogru about this, but he's always said they were saving it as a surprise for me. But now he gets up and starts out the door. You will know of the surprise at last, he says. And he leads me to the big barn, which has always been closed. Well, you can hang me for a long hair when we get inside, for there are about 200 of the duck people shuffling around like a flock of jitterbugs, and 10 or 12 players giving out on some corny rhythm on a raised platform for a bandstand. They have about 3/4 percussion, mainly tom-tom-like drums, but there are a few gut buckets of some kind, which they do not appear to play for nothing. Ogru looks at me. Is it not magnificent? He says. Well, I say, it's all right, but where I come from, it's done in a slightly different manner. I shall be happy to show you if you'll kindly produce my horn. I can hardly wait to lay my lip into a solid beat the more I listen to these ickies peeling it off the cob, and when one of them finally brings in old Susie, I kiss her lovingly. She is in fine shape. Old Ogru stops the noise. He makes an announcement, and everything is quiet as I step up with my slush pump. It's like Goodman at Carnegie Hall. Everybody crowds around as I give out with the Royal Garden Blues. I see I have them overcome, and I begin to send softly as I hear one of the boys pick up the beat in the background. He's not so awful at that. After I've taken 2 choruses, one of the gut buckets has picked up the melody, and I dub in the harmony for him. The crowd is beginning to sway slightly, and when I slide into Rose's room, pretty soon they're on the jump, and it's worse than a bunch of alligators at a Krupa concert. All in all, it is a very successful performance indeed. By the time I finish, I see I have first chair cinched, and the crowd's eating out of my hand. This is by no means the last performance I give. I soon have the duckmen in the band playing the best jive they can give out with. But it's rather sorry without any reeds and only 1 brass. They are entirely unable to play wind instruments, though, so I'm forced to make the best of it. We play for 3 or 4 hours, and when old Ogru and I finally leave the hall, I'm cheered all down the line. I'm really terrific. Mac, Ogru tells me when we're outside, you are wonderful. We appreciate music, and in fact, it is the biggest thing in our lives here. But you're lucky that we're the ones that found you on your arrival, not the animal men from the woods. They are very ignorant, and your trombone would have meant nothing to them." Well, this is the first time I've heard about those animal men, and I figure maybe they're a little closer to civilization than Augur thinks. I ask him about them. "They are our enemies," he says, "and are much stronger than we are. They control all the land surrounding us, but on the water we have the best of them, and they never try to attack us here. However, we must venture into the forest sometimes, and then we're in constant danger. Many of us are killed or captured each year." I think no more about this, however, and I spend my time playing for the concerts they have every day. I'm very popular with one and all. But a few weeks afterwards, Augur asks me to join one of their expeditions into the forests. "We have to gather our monthly food crop," he says, "and everyone in the community has to do his share, and as you are now one of us, it's only fitting that you come along." Well, of course, I clap Augur on the back and I tell him I'll be very pleased to go, and in fact, I'm not worried much about their enemies, because I'm a good 100 pounds heavier than any of the duckmen, and I figure I'll be plenty for those animal people to handle. As it turns out, I'm right in this respect, but I hit one bad note which almost costs me my life and very possibly does so for my friends. There are about 20 of us that start out. Each one is carrying 2 large baskets made out of purple reeds which grow in the swampy lowlands of the islands. Before we begin, I tell Augur that I'll swim over if he'll carry my baskets, but he does not understand what I mean until I dive into the river and demonstrate. This exhibition is a great surprise to everyone, as they've never seen anything like it before. When I've climbed out on the other bank, the rest of the party jumps in and floats over rapidly. Then we begin walking toward the deep purple forest. We hustle around all morning, and there's no trouble. What we're gathering is some kind of mushroom that grows in front of the trees, and we're looking for certain vegetables which have to have the shade to amount to anything. It's in the afternoon, shortly before we're ready to depart, that one of the men who's acting as a lookout gives the alarm. There's a group of animal men hunting in the woods, and they've spotted us. I'm curious to see how these men appear, and I hang back some while the others run as fast as they can on their web feet toward the river. They're luckily near the water, for they can never outdistance these land people. Well, I know I can catch up, so as I say, I wait a couple of seconds. But when I have a gander at our enemies, I'm off faster than a 64th beat, and none too soon. As a matter of fact, it's a wonder that I'm able to run at all, for what I see charging at me is about 10 big, 2-headed monsters, running on 4 legs sometimes on 2. They're not quite as large as a man when they stand up, but they are enough to send me heading for the river. I dive in just before they get there, and I'm churning the water like the Queen Mary when I hit the island. Then I look around to see what's happened. The monsters are lined up at the edge of the river watching us, but they do not try to cross over. They're pointing at me and acting excited, and Augur laughs. "They've never seen anything like you," he says. "But we are safe now, for they cannot, swim?" I say that is very lucky indeed, as they are remarkably tough-appearing babies, but we do not bother any more with them, and pretty soon they've disappeared into the forest. It's over a week later that I realize what a bad note I hit and what it's going to do to us. I'm sitting on a rock near the island's edge this morning trying to work a little oil out of some plants that I've found. I wish to apply some of this to my slip horn as the action's getting somewhat gummy, and I've neglected to bring any of those necessities with me when I ride out of Benny's. While I'm doing this, I see some of the animal men come out of the forest and start toward the river. This is odd, since I'm told they never do this. They do not see me, so I stay where I am. And I see 2 of them talking and arguing with the others. These 2 seem to have some idea, and the rest are telling them no, shaking all their heads to do it. It must be a real argument, I think, with 2 mouths to speak with at the same time. I wonder if one of these animals could get 2-part harmony with a pair of trumpets, but then I recall they are strictly ickies, so old Augur has explained to me. So I watch them some more, and pretty soon the 2 who are talking most jump right into the river and begin to throw their legs up and down and flail their arms. And they're soon moving across the water, just as if they could swim. In fact, they are swimming. And this excites me greatly, since Ogru has said they could not do this. I get up quick and begin to hunt Ogru, and luckily I find him right away. I tell him what's taking place, and he's also greatly excited. "I'm afraid we've done it now, Mac," he says, as we run back to where I saw the animal men. "These creatures are highly imitative. It's the only way they seem to gain any new skill, and they must have been thinking over what they saw when they watched you swim away from them last week." By the time he's told me this, we're back where I've left my trombone and are just in time to see the last of the group jump into the river. They're able to make the nearest island, which has a small village of about maybe 50 people. Well, I do not like this part of my story much, and I'll cut it short. What happens is that the animal men wipe out that little village in 10 minutes, and right before our eyes. The animals are extremely happy, and we see them grinning with their ugly double faces as they return to shore. "Quick," says Ogru. "We have only a little time. They'll bring the rest of their tribe immediately and attack all the rest of our islands. We must hide." I grab my horn. We hurry to notify our own village, but we are stopped. There's no place to go. Then we hear the menacing roar of the animal men. As we run, they can be seen jumping into the river one by one. There are hundreds of them. I turn resignedly to Ogru. I start to tell him that we must get something to defend ourselves with, but the people are so paralyzed with fear that I know we can never do it. Then before I can say anything, I see the villagers coming slowly toward Ogru and me. They seem very angry indeed. Ogru speaks hurriedly. "They're after you, Mac. You're the one that showed the animal men how to swim, and they're after you. In the state they're in, you will probably be killed. I'll try to reason with them, but it's almost certain to be useless, for they might even be after me. I've been your sponsor." He slaps me on the back and then starts toward his people. I do not know what to do. I can see a detachment of the animal people not more than 100 yards offshore, and the duckmen are moving angrily toward me and not much further away. I see them push Ogru aside as he begins to say something to them. I move my trombone nervously, and suddenly I see my only chance. I'm shaking before I start, but I fit the mouthpiece to my lip and begin to blow. I take a fast scale, and I hit the B natural for Stardust, at least an octave higher than it's ever been played before. I got to ride high and fast. Well, I close my eyes, and I'm shaking so that I hardly notice the vibrations of the horn begin. But when I reach the E in the third measure, I know I'm feeling what I felt in Benny's, so I keep pushing it. The last I remember, I'm trying to reach the high C closing. That is when I pass out. When I come to this time, I'm almost afraid to open my eyes. My ears are still buzzing, and I'm just beginning to realize weakly what's happened when I hear voices around me which are not part of the score. They are speaking in English. I open my eyes then and look around. I find that I'm surrounded by a crowd of people who are saying to one another to give him air, take it easy, and I perceive that I'm on a city sidewalk, and in fact, as I look up, I see it somewhere on 52nd Street. A perfect landing for a tailgate artist, I think, as I sit up. When the crowd sees me do this, they move in even closer, all the time telling one another to give me air. But finally one of them claims that he's a doctor, and he helps me up, and I go with him, and another man in uniform who's probably a policeman. They tell me they're taking me to a hospital. I don't remember much after that. When I wake up again, I am in a hospital. A doctor has hold of my wrist, and when he sees me open my eyes, he says, "How are you feeling now?" I tell him okay. "Well," he says, "you seem to have had quite a shock. Perhaps you don't want to discuss it now, but your manner of dress and this instrument which you've brought with you have excited my curiosity no little." I see that my trombone is on the table near him. "Why, no, I do not mind telling you," I say, "though you might find it hard to believe what I've gone through. But first, where am I? What month is it?" The doctor lets go of my wrist. "You're in New York," he says, "and it's September of the year 2507. "Just a minute," I say. I must misunderstand you. I thought you said the year was 2507. That's what I did say, says the doc. But that cannot be true, I tell him. Why, I was born in 1914. It's not possible for me to be living at such a period in history. He picks up my wrist again. You are a little excited, he says, and I think you'd better get a bit more rest. Then we can talk this thing over later. I see him say something to the nurse who's standing in the doorway all this time, and she nods as he goes out. I start to call to him, but I figure it's of no use, so I go back to sleep. The second time I wake up, the doc's back, and he has 4 other men with him. They're sitting in chairs around the room and watching me. As soon as they see I'm awake, they come over to my bed. These men are very much interested in your case, the doctor tells me. I've been telling them about your statement and the strange circumstances attending your appearance on 52nd Street today. Now I feel that you've had enough rest, and I want you to tell them the entire story. Well, I know they will figure I'm off the beat, but I start at the beginning and I relate the whole story anyway. They do not say a word until I've finished. Then they look at each other and have a whispered session on the other side of the room. Finally, one of them speaks up. Mr. McRae, he says, we want to question you a little further, if you don't mind. Will you please put on your clothes and come with us? I do like to say, since there's nothing else for me to do. And when I'm dressed, they take me down the hall to a big, light room, which is practically all glass, and they ask me to sit down at a large table. Now, Mr. McRae, the first doc says, I want you to do something for me. He hands me 10 little blocks of different sizes and informs me that I'm to place them in the proper holes on the board, which he has ready for just that purpose. I do as he asks. These seem to surprise him, but he's all set with yet another test, and I spend the rest of the afternoon playing these little games until I'm pretty weary of it, and I say so to him. Well, he says, as you likely know, we've been trying to determine your sanity, and I will say you have demonstrated yourself to be entirely normal. That's fine, I say, but now that we have decided that, will someone kindly tell me what is this business about 2507, and what's been happening to me anyhow? Another of the doctors answers me. There seems to be only one other explanation, he says, one which we're reluctant to accept, but which we must consider if your story is true. You have been in a 4th dimension. The passage of time there is something that we know nothing of, and it's possible that the few months you've spent in it were equivalent to the centuries which have passed in this dimension. You apparently have evolved a unique and purely personal method for entering and leaving the 4th dimension. And since it seems entirely dependent upon your own physical skill, together with a large element of chance, it's of little value for scientific exploitation. That is the pity. While he's giving out this statement, the rest of the doctors grow very excited, and as soon as he's finished, they begin throwing questions at him about curvature of space, Nielsen's theory, and a lot of other stuff, which is very confusing to me indeed. Finally, I stop them. If you will kindly return my trombone, I tell them, I'll be on my way, as I do not know anything of all this, and I'd like to get out and see what it's like in 2507 A.D. Of course, says the first doctor, who's the one who brought me to the hospital. It's very thoughtless of us. I shall get your instrument, and you can come home with me until you're able to adjust yourself to our way of living. It will be a great pleasure to show you what we have accomplished in the time since you can remember, though I must say that none of us has done what you've done. He laughs a little at that, and I figure he's a nice guy, so I'll be happy to accept his offer. I go home with him. He introduces me to his wife, who's a very nice-appearing female. He tells her all about me, and he keeps saying how remarkable it is all the time. It's the next morning when I come down to breakfast that I meet the doctor's daughter, who is a very lovely little number of about 20, and I see that my stay is going to be a very pleasant one indeed. She says, Dad has been telling me all about you, Mr. McRae, and I'm going to see to it that you really see the New York of 2507. He wants to drag you to a lot of stuffy old lectures and scientific conventions and exhibit you like a freak, but I'm taking charge today. I remark, that'll be fine. Well, we start right out, and it's amazing what's been done in my absence. And, this is the little number's name, Tells me about the change in one thing and another, and they're now taking vacations on Venus and Mars, and it's merely a matter of a couple of hours to get to San Francisco or London. Of course, this is all very interesting, but I'm interested in what they're doing in the musical line. I tell Anne this. We are in luck, she says, for there's a concert tonight up in Albany, and you'll be able to hear the finest music there. I do not wish to hear the Longhairs play, I tell her. Let's go down along 52nd Street. Listen to a little barrel house. That's my racket. There is no musical organization on 52nd Street, Anne says. We do all our listening and looking at concerts like this one in Albany, and it's the only sort of music we have. By this time we're home, so I ask Anne if she would like to hear how we played it back in the 20th century. She replies that she would, but not to let her father, the doc, know about it, because he's something of a bug on the modern music and considers the old style quite degenerate. I laugh at this. What he means by the old style is probably something I've never heard. You must remember that I'm almost 600 years old, so my style is practically antique. Why, your father did not even know that my horn was a musical instrument until I told him my story. And it's indeed a shame there are not a few old Biederbeck platters around so you can hear what you've been missing. Well, I've not played the old slush pump since I escaped from the fourth dimension, so I'm careful when I pick it up. But after I've tried a few runs, I say I'm all set. Anne is very curious, and she makes me tell her how it works, as it seems they use instruments altogether different in these concerts we're going to. I explain how the wind goes around and all, and then I move into I'm getting sentimental over you. I'm very mellow, and T. Dorsey couldn't have sounded any better in the little concert that I give. Anne is very overcome. It is beautiful, she says when I finish. Are there words to it? I tell her there are, but that I don't know them, so she hums softly as I take another chorus. She has a lovely voice, and I say that tomorrow I'll write down the words to some other numbers and let her practice them with me. When the doctor hears that we're going to the concert that evening, he says he wishes to come along. We get to Albany in about 5 minutes, so fast that I see nothing in the journey once we have left the New York airport where the doc keeps his plane. And we enter the auditorium in perfect time. As we go in, I'm very surprised to see everyone staring at me, since I've borrowed one of the doctor's suits for the occasion and look just like anyone else. Then everyone stands and begins cheering me until I'm very embarrassed indeed. I look at Anne and the doctor. They're both smiling. You know now that you've become a celebrity, whispers Anne. We didn't want to let you know right away, but the papers have been full of your story. So I smile and bow to the crowd, which keeps on clapping. It's very pleasing. Finally, however, the noise stops and the curtain raises. There are on stage about 30 or 40 musicians. Behind them is a large screen, like in a moving picture house. Also, there are a lot of electric cords in sight, and I cannot figure what they're for until I notice that each instrument is wired like an electric guitar. When the conductor comes on, everybody claps a little more, and then he turns to the orchestra. What I hear after that is something I never expect to hear in my life. All those electric instruments begin to vibrate, and on the screen behind them, all sorts of shapes and colors begin to flash and then disappear. This keeps up as long as the number lasts. You're now seeing music as well as hearing it, the doctor tells me. I never saw any like that before, I say. All the music I've ever seen has been the regular dot variety. Do the men play from those flashes? Why, no, the doc smiles. Those symbols that you see are the result of the electric impulse as the musicians strike certain notes on their instruments. They're never the same, and to me they're vastly intriguing. Strictly, it was lousy. Oh, I say. The following day, Anne informs me they're going on a picnic and asks me will I please bring my trombone along and teach her a few songs. About 11 o'clock, we get in Anne's plane, and in no time we're down in Virginia in a nice little spot by a small stream. I often come down here, Anne says. It's one of the best places I know. There's something that seems awfully strange to me, and I finally realize that it's the green grass of the meadow and the trees after the icky purple that I've been used to for the past few months. I tell Anne about this and how beautiful the green looks, but I add that it's still not as lovely as she is. She says that's very nice. Then as I stand up from spreading the picnic cloth, she is standing beside me. So I put my arms around her, and then I'm kissing her, and she's kissing me, and it's very pleasant indeed. I see that this is much better than any fourth dimension. Finally, we get around to eating the lunch Anne has brought, and I keep saying how lovely she is, which I also mean, and she's saying I'm pretty fine too, and we pass some little time like this. But after a while, Anne says, "Mac, will you play for me now? I love to hear you." So I say, I will if she will sing, and I give her the words to the St. Louis Blues, which I've written out. I hit it soft and easy for one chorus to give her the melody, and then she takes the beat. Well, I've not realized it before, but her voice is plenty schmaltz, and it's a shame she's not living in my time, for she'd be a cinch to panic them anywhere. After that, she does the Memphis Blues also, and she has me writing beautifully to keep her up there. She is wonderful. "You're the one who's wonderful," she says. "I've never heard music like you can get out of that trombone. Play something else, darling, won't you?" I slip into If I Could Shimmy Like My Sister Kate, and as I play, Anne moves over beside me. "Lovely," she whispers. With that, I'm really carried away, and I hear her humming softly as I modulate into T for two. I'm giving it a real ride, and then I feel it coming over me again. I'm in a panic. I try to stop playing, but I can't. My body is vibrating something terrible. I dimly hear Anne crying, "Mag, Mag," as I sink off. This is the last I can remember. When I come out of it this time, someone's pounding me on the back. "Anne?" I say hopefully, but I know inside it'll be useless. "Beautiful going, Mac, beautiful," someone is saying. "What?" I ask blankly. "That's Stardust. Boy, you were really out of the world on that one." Then I open my eyes and look up. It's Ernie Martin, our sax player, who has the chair next to me in Benny's. I look around. I'm back in Benny's. As I put down my slip horn, there's a scattering of applause from the tables. Someone shouts at me. I close my eyes, but the noise is still there. I keep my eyes closed. Then I hear music. Ernie is hitting me with his elbow. "Get in," he says. I hear the boys beating out Rosetta. "Take it up," says Ernie. "Get hep, kid." "Me?" I says, sort of foggy-like. "Oh, no, not me. Leastways, not tonight." I pick up old Susie and walk out the door. I wonder if maybe there's such a thing as being too hep. End of The Band Played On by C. Shook.
Riders in the Sky by Marc R. Schorer and August W. Derleth. From Weird Tales, May 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Dale Grothmann. A Tale of Pagan Worship. Riders in the Sky by Marc R. Schorer and August W. Derleth. The following manuscript was found in the temple of the moon god, Sin, in the ancient city of Ur, on the lower Euphrates, by a searching party sent out to discover traces of the vanished expedition of Dr. James Marlowe. It is obviously the diary of Dr. Fenton, Dr. Marlowe's assistant on the expedition. August 17th. We arrived here today, but without our native helpers. Curiously enough, they refused to accompany us to the site of Ur. We are rather at a loss without them, and our excavations must consequently be limited. We will, however, go ahead with the work. August 27th. We have started excavation upon a mound, beneath which we hope to find the ancient temple of Sin, the moon god, whose chief shrine, Rawlinson says, was at Ur, the city being under the special protection of the moon god. September 11th. Dr. Marlowe has been unable to get native aid from the surrounding region. For some reason, they fear this place. October 7th. We have at last uncovered the temple of sin, and have cleared quite a space before the temple. All indications point to the reign of Chedorlaomer of the Elamitic dynasty, who reigned at Ur in 1976 BC, during the greatest power of the ancient Chaldean kingdom of Ur. The temple is characteristic of those found in Borsip and Kala, but infinitely larger. The crescent, symbol of sin, and the 8-rayed disk, symbol of Ai, the moon goddess, who presides over life, are present side by side on the high altar. There is a huge overturned table before the altar, which we have every reason to believe is a sacrificial table. Tomorrow we shall attempt to raise it. October 8th. Some of our expedition were playing a practical joke on us last night. This morning the sacrificial table was set up. So were a number of images of I and sin. The table seemed particularly weighty to us, and it must have taken much effort to set it upright. Later. Our men consistently deny any hand in the raising of the table, but it is ridiculous to do so. Dr. Marlowe insists on an admission of participation in the affair, but I fear he is doomed to disappointment. It strikes me most peculiar that the men hold to their view. Surely the table did not lift itself, as they would have us believe. October 9. There is a strong current of unrest among the men. It must be the affair of the sacrificial table that is so stirring them up. So far, no one has admitted a hand in the matter. Later. Dr. Marlowe is furious. Someone has been at work in the temple and has uncovered a treasure beneath the altar. It consists mainly of sacrificial vessels of silver, copper, bronze, and beaten gold, very similar to those discovered at Mycena by Dr. Schliemann. This discovery has spread among the men, and Dr. Marlowe suspects the existence of a conspiracy to get hold of the treasure. I am prone to agree with him, for there is no telling what men will do in practical isolation such as this. It would be comparatively easy to escape with the treasure to the Euphrates, which lies not far from here. However, I do not believe that there is any imminent danger. October 10. Our men threatened to leave us today. No mention was made of the treasure of sin, but there is a strong complaint of the sacrificial table affair, and of another matter, which the men claim has bothered them since the excavating of the table was finished. It concerns strange noises in the night, of which the men show an almost superstitious fear. They insist that they have heard noises, as of riders in the dark. A great army, they say. This is strange. Personally, I give it no credence, but Dr. Marlowe is struck by it. There is no road within hearing distance, and when I told the men so, they said that the noises did not come from afar, but from nearby. This irritated Dr. Marlowe still more, but it appears to me utterly ridiculous. I dismissed them curtly. October 11th. As I feared, the men have deserted with the treasure. Dr. Marlowe says nothing. He is thinking of the advisability of deserting the excavation, but he will never do it. Later, Dr. Marlowe asked me whether I had heard anything during the night, and when I said I had not, he dismissed the matter. October 12th. Dr. Marlowe seems to have forgotten the desertion of yesterday. He is troubled about something, and has spent his time wandering absently about the excavations. Later, Dr. Marlowe confided that he had heard riders during the night. "A great beating of hooves, Fenton," he said, "and if it does not sound too fantastic, of wings." I told him that I had heard nothing, but as I am considerably removed from his tent, it is not unnatural. Dr. Marlowe is situated on one side of the temple. Tonight, I shall move to his tent. October 13th. There is no doubt of it. There is an army of writers somewhere near, and somewhere there is a great flapping of wings. It was perfectly clear to both Dr. Marlowe and me last night. We left our tent and ventured into the darkness of Ur, but saw nothing. We will watch tonight. Dr. Marlowe says there will be a moon in an unclouded sky. Last night, and for some days before, the sky has been overcast, though it is the period of the full moon. October 14th. We watched last night, but I concede nothing we saw. The only explanation of what occurred is that we must have fallen asleep. I remember suddenly hearing, with a great rush and swirl of air, the beating of hoofs of a vast army and the flapping of strange wings. Suddenly there swept into clear view in the moonlight a great mass of purple things that came from nowhere, from space, from the outermost cosmos. They swept from the sky into the space before the temple, and from there into the interior of the shrine of Sin and I, where we followed them at a discreet distance. The crescent of Sin on the high altar shone like fire, and before it were the purple things, undulating in a great mass of fearful grotesques, neither man nor beast, but a horrible mixture of both, with awful travesties of human faces. They had no arms, but great wings like bats, with long tendrils lashing to and fro like gigantic cilia. Backward and forward this formless mass undulated, amid a low throbbing murmur, worshipping the shining crescent of the moon god, Sin. A number of grotesque creatures slithered over the sacrificial stone and sank down upon its surface in fleshless masses. This worship continued for long hours until the red and gray of dawn shone in the east. Then slowly, gathering volume, began the sound of beating hooves and flapping wings, and the foremost of the purple things began to rise slowly into the air toward the great square opening in the roof of the temple just above the sacrificial table. It was followed by the rest in a long purple line of formlessness. As suddenly as they had come, so they were gone, and Dr. Marlowe and I were left alone. I am not willing to believe that this was other than an hallucination. Dr. Marlowe, however, disagrees with me. He bases his opinion on the study of ancient fetishism that he has made. As tonight is the night of the full moon, we are to watch again. Later, Dr. Marlowe has given up all attempts to identify the purple things. He is convinced that they are from another Earth, and is satisfied to call them moon creatures. Beyond the fact that they worship Sin, he does not attempt to explain their presence in the city of Ur. Approaching midnight, we are seated in the temple somewhat left of the sacrificial table, in a small enclosed space shrouded in darkness. I have brought my diary along to record all that happens tonight. There is a huge patch of moonlight on the floor of the temple that comes from the opening in the roof. I can dimly hear the hoofbeats in the sky and the flapping of wings. There is a formless shadow in the moonlight on the floor. Dr. Marlowe, too, hears them coming. The crescent of Sin is beginning to glow, and, yes, the disk of I is glowing also. The purple things are entering the temple as before. Some of them drop from the opening in the center of the roof. There is a certain systematic assemblage of their ranks as they supplicate before the glowing emblems on the high altar. The same low murmuring sound rises from their midst. The tendrils of their bat wings lash the air in rhythmic motion. The mass of moon creatures undulates backward and forward. A few of the creatures are slithering toward the sacrificial table. They climb to its flat surface, continuing to bow before the altar. It is almost as if these purple things led the mass of others. They are turning now, and the undulating movement is slowly ceasing. The murmuring, too, is gone. The three things on the table lash their tendrils in unison. Those of the mass are silent. It is from these tendrils that comes the low humming sound I hear. There is a lull in the tendrils of the three, and a murmur as of assent from the mass. The moon creatures are slowly altering their position so that they are now facing us. I wonder if we are as perceptible to them as they are to us. The three on the table are extending their tendrils toward us, and the humming sound again becomes audible. The sound is increasing in intensity. It seems to be affecting Dr. Marlowe. Dr. Marlowe is rising and going toward the three on the sacrificial table. I called to him, but he did not answer. It was almost as if he were hypnotized. Perhaps he wishes to observe these peculiar purple creatures at close quarters. But no, he has mounted the table amid a humming sound from the mass, which is now moving toward him. He is surrounded by these things, but he does not cry out. The purple things are building a pyramid of their bodies, a pyramid that reaches to the opening in the roof and beyond. Vivid flashes of fire come from the glowing emblems on the altar. A blinding flash of light, and the pyramid of bodies crumbles. Unhurt, the creatures are reorganizing, and all is as before. But no, Dr. Marlowe is gone. The three on the table turn toward me. Their tendrils are extended, and I am beginning to feel drowsy. My God, Dr. Marlowe and I have been sitting in the place reserved for sacrifices to the moon god. It was Dr. Marlowe who graced the top of that sacrificial pyramid of purple things. The ghastly humming is beginning again. I could feel the power of those tendrils drawing me onward, onward, outward, into the cosmos. The humming is very loud. I wonder where Dr. Marlowe is, and what I am doing here. Glory in the highest to the great god Sin. I no longer want to write. I am the chosen of sins. The following is an excerpt from a letter written to Dr. Gillen, head of the British Archaeology Society, and dated earlier in May of the year succeeding that of Dr. Fenton's diary. It is signed by Dr. Robbins, head of the party searching for Dr. Marlowe. In regard to the diary, I can say nothing, neither that I believe nor disbelieve all this preposterous writing. But there have appeared certain conflicting bits of evidence that are undoubtedly significant. The men referred to in the paragraph dated October 11 were never seen again, so far as we know. Several of our party, out on a scouting expedition, found on the banks of the Euphrates a plate of beaten gold, upon which were engraved the symbolic crescent and disk of Sin and I. It is clearly identical with the sacrificial vessels mentioned by Dr. Fenton. You know that we have discovered no sign of bodies. Yet we cannot bring ourselves to believe the last entry in the diary. But it is remarkable to write you and tell you that yesterday evening we discovered, on the roof of the Temple of Sin, Dr. Marlowe's watch. His name was engraved on the back. The watch was badly smashed, as if it had been dropped a long way. The end of Riders in the Sky by Marc R. Schorer and August W. Derleth. Reprisal by Thomas Richard Jones. From Amazing Stories, October 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Dale Grothmann. Reprisal by Thomas Richard Jones. On the morning of November 1st, 1931, Londoners were mildly amused at the following advertisement appearing in all the newspapers. Warning: in exactly 2 weeks the Thames will freeze over, and Great Britain will become a bleak and almost barren country. Henceforth it will be a land of snow and ice. While it is most unlikely that this statement will be given any credence at this time, November 15th will bring proof. He who controls. Some kind of advertising stunt, said those who took the trouble to discuss it at all. Even Scotland Yard authorities, who missed nothing out of the ordinary, did not give the warning a second thought. The chief weather forecaster only smiled. Dispatches in the afternoon paper, however, brought this curious bit of publicity into greater prominence. They announced that the leading publications in Glasgow, Belfast, Dublin, Edinburgh, and Oslo, and several other cities had carried notices of similar import, all predicting permanent climatic change in 2 weeks' time. The copy of the advertisement, said the news stories, was sent to each publisher from London with cash accompanying the orders. The instructions were signed by one Boric Hengston, who, it is assumed, represented some business firm that would later follow up with the usual announcement of a new kind of ice cream freezer, refrigerator, or other commodity. The advertising managers were accustomed to trick advertising copy and believe the originator will have reason to be pleased over the comment created. Some have expressed the opinion that the warnings were inserted by an insane person. No attention is being paid to the affair beyond a little speculation at so bizarre an announcement. But no follow-up matter went to the press. He who controls evidently felt he had done enough for the present, and the incident was forgotten by everybody. On the evening of November 14th, late pedestrians drifting through Trafalgar Square, Regent Street, Oxford Street, and Piccadilly noted a remarkable rapid lifting of the blanket of fog which had enveloped the streets, and drew their topcoats closer about them, as an icy blast swept in from the sea. The next morning they awoke to find their thermometers hovering down towards zero and falling fast. By noon it was 15 below, and when evening lights again twinkled, a solid sheet of glistening ice stretched out before the House of Parliament, and traffic had long since ceased. London's millions, with chattering teeth, had sought shelter from the terrible, cutting cold. By the second morning, people remembered. Those who did not were reminded, for blazoned across the page of every newspaper was a message of 4 words, and it read, "Do you now believe?" And it was signed, "He who controls." Here was a real newspaper story. It was carried in every journal, in Britain, on the continent, in the Orient, in America. The details of the cold wave which had struck Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Norway, and the other northern countries were harrowing. Ice floes filled the Irish and North Sea. The Clyde was a solid chunk of congealed water. Shipping was at a standstill. Industries were paralyzed. Whole herds of sheep had perished, and the coal and food supplies, though sufficient for the moment, would need replenishing if the cold kept up. The warning of the insane jester Boric Hegsteen was on every lip. Not that he could possibly have had anything to do with conditions, but because it was uncanny that his prediction could have come true. A silk-hatted, dignified representative of His Majesty's government summoned the power of Scotland Yard. "It is absurd," he said, "yet this Hegstein must be found. He could not have sent this weather, for only God can do that. Yet there is a mystery somewhere, and therefore it will help the state of the public mind for us to find him and hear what he has to say." But Boric Hegstein did not wish to remain in obscurity. While the police net was being carefully spread, he walked coolly into headquarters, gave his name, and said, "I am he who controls." "Then," asked the officer, "will you make an explanation of your strange prediction and the luck or prophetic vision which brought it to pass?" "I will speak only to the Premier," said Boric. "No other man shall hear my story." "Come then, I will take you to him at once." Through the desolated street, still colder, they labored, and finally arrived at the chambers of the Premier. The police officer withdrew. The Master of Men and the Master of Science faced each other. "Well," began the Premier with a questioning inflection. "My name," said the visitor, "is in reality Boric Hegstein. I have not sailed under false colors. There is something I wanted. I was never able to get it. I have taken the only means left, and used my scientific knowledge." "What did you want?" £1,000,000 sterling. "A trifle, to be sure," the Premier smiled grimly. "But you have still explained nothing. Your remarkable predictions, your professed control over the elements, your appearance here, and your request for money." "The situation is simple, although at present distressing," began Boric. "Call it revenge. Call it simple justice. Whatever you will call it, it requires £1,000,000 to right a wrong once done to me by the government. When that is paid, or assured me, I, who control your weather, will give back to you the genial climate of which you have always boasted. On the other hand, should you fail to meet my terms, the conditions you now experience will continue." "And do you expect me," said the Premier, "to believe for a second that you have such power? Are you insane? Think, man, what a ridiculous proposal you make." "That is entirely for you to think over. I have spoken, and I am a man of few words." "Tell me," said the official, "in what way did the government do you wrong?" "When I was a mere lad, just out of an academy, I had ambitions of becoming a great engineer. By the way, I have become one in middle life. But at the time I mentioned, I was taking a special private course in hydraulic engineering, preparing to work my way through the technical course at the university. I was very poor, often in want. One day, while at work in my bare sitting room, I kindled a fire with some coal I had brought in a paper bag. I was wrongfully accused of having stolen the coal from the neighboring roomer. For this I served 2 years in prison. Though obscure, my record was good. The evidence was purely circumstantial. The judge should have rejected it. After reaching prison, I made repeated attempts to secure clemency and submitted newly established evidence, which, if heard, would properly have cleared my name. I got no change. I lost 2 years of study. My name was blackened. I decided that someday Britain should pay." "Well," impatiently, "what was that to do with our climate?" "Curiously enough, almost humorously, I might say," replied Boric, "it has everything to do with it. In later years, I have overcome all obstacles. I have gone deep into many scientific subjects, and I now control your temperatures. For £1,000,000, I will bring you normal fall weather. Without the payment, I shall be indifferent." "I will have you confined," said the Premier. "We can at least put you where you will not be a disturbing influence." "As you will. Only by so doing you will prolong the suffering of your people and will cause untold economic waste. What about Scotland, Ireland, Norway, and the others affected? Unfortunately, I could not confine my operations merely to England." "But your position is entirely untenable," argued the Premier. "The government would be the laughing stock of the world if it listened to you." "So far as I am concerned," promised Boric, "the world will not know. I will be that generous, although I might get some revenge from making you ridiculous. Would you give £1,000,000 to get your climate back?" "Yes, every day of this is costing millions." "This, then, is my proposal. Place confidentially, to my credit, in the Bank of England, the entire amount I asked, subject to withdrawal by me, if I keep faith with you. In the meantime, keep me under guard. Let me first send a cablegram in private code to New York. In a few days, your cold wave will begin a gradual diminution. When you're satisfied, release me, and I shall depart with my money. I assure you, most of it will be spent for further scientific investigation, for my personal wants are simple." "I never believed I would live long enough to commit such folly," said the Premier. "But it is agreed. Tonight you go into a cell, now, within an hour, and the funds shall be deposited subject to your call." Then, one day the frozen streams began to empty their ice into the sea, and the great industrial centers of the North Country took on life. The breezes blowing over Ireland became softer, and the shamrock and hawthorn began again to be green. The story of the crazy weather prophet had been forgotten. The biggest cold snap in history languished. Boris Hengston bade goodbye to the mystified Premier. The bargain they had driven remained a secret among the two principals, the bank, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the police. "The affair has been satisfactorily terminated," said the Premier. "Whether you had anything to do with it or not, the country is again safe. But in order to restore my own self-respect, if possible, will you now tell me the real story? I guarantee you immunity from arrest. You can depart in peace with your £1,000,000. God knows I'm in a hurry for you to be on your way." "Yes, I will tell you," said Boric. "The story is known only to myself and two others who will never divulge it. If you two can avoid mentioning any of the details to any of your associates, the world will perhaps be better off. For what I know is fraught with danger, as you can see. Some years ago, I became deeply interested in oceanography, and particularly so with regard to equatorial latitudes, where I had some important contacts. I got to studying the equatorial currents and came to the conclusion that there must be some particular point in the neighborhood of the West Indies which would be the controlling locality in the Gulf Stream. Of course, you know that the southern and northern currents eddy around off the West Indies. One of the big currents goes south along the South American coast, and the other kicks northward, following the Atlantic coast for a while, and then takes a northeasterly course across the Atlantic in what is called the Gulf Stream drift. It is this drift that tempers your climate and keeps it from being similar to that of Labrador. And do you mean to say— Let me finish. The boat train is nearly due to leave. I sounded those currents, which are of course many miles in width, measuring their velocity and depth in many places. I analyzed the winds and the bottom of the sea, the contours of the islands, and finally found a small island, one of the West Indies group, the name is immaterial to you, which I decided was the pivotal point in the turning of these currents. I knew that by contriving to deflect that current at that point in another direction, I could influence the whole drift. And you were planning, then, your revenge on Britain? Not yet. At first, it was merely the study of a subject that excited my interest. Then I got to thinking of the possible results, and saw that I could in this way make you pay for my injury, and incidentally aid me in my scientific development. To conclude, I added to a small cruiser which I owned, a boat of the submarine type, and began working out my investigation. I gave it out to the natives that I was studying tidal phenomenon and doing a little fishing besides. But all the time I was laying a few cement foundations at the critical point in the ocean bed. These obstructions, aided by a dozen large pumps placed at just the right spot, started a deflection of the northern equatorial current at its key point of strength. I found that by operating my pumps and using my submerged breakwaters, the plan worked, and soon the whole drift was headed south. When my preparations were complete, I left my 2 confidential men in charge of the work and proceeded to New York, thence to London. I had calculated the length of time for the warm water to cool and the Gulf Stream to become inactive. That was easy because I knew its velocity. I could tell almost to the exact day when your cold wave would begin. When I sent my cable some days ago, it was relayed and reached my men in the Caribbean waters. They stopped operations immediately, and of course nature did the rest. The Gulf Stream swung into its normal channel, and there you are. That's a terrible secret, gasped the Premier. You'll never mention this? I promise, said Boric, and he left. Warmer weather, read the next day's report as published by the forecasters, is still in prospect. A gradual breaking up of the unusual cold wave originating off the Greenland coast, and which for a time paralyzed businesses, continues. The extraordinary situation, which has been thoroughly analyzed by the department, will be completely mastered by tomorrow, and our climate will be restored to normalcy. The end of The Reprisal by Thomas Richard Jones.